The highly anticipated 2023 zombie thriller The Walking Dead, Daryl Dixon Season 1 has finally hit the screens. As a man who will never disappoint you, Daryl Dixon is truly deserving of being the undisputed king of popularity in The Walking Dead. In comparison to the recently concluded Dead City Season 1, fans are even more excited about the premiere of The Walking Dead, Daryl Dixon Season 1. Without further ado, let's dive right in. Daryl's zombie adventure in France has officially begun. At 9:30 in the morning, somewhere in the vast Atlantic, Daryl and his small boat had been drifting for countless days and nights. At that moment, a wave hit the unconscious Daryl and he dove into the water. Thankfully, Daryl came to his senses. However, days of scorching sun and hunger had left this man utterly exhausted. With all his strength, he attempted to crawl onto the beach, but a small wave easily knocked him back. Fortunately, land wasn't too far away and Daryl managed to escape the ocean. Surveying the unfamiliar surroundings, he showed no signs of fear. Instead, he immediately fixed his gaze on a water bucket ahead. Without thinking too much, Daryl picked up the bucket and drank the water mixed with fine sand. Since his small boat had already been swept away by the waves, Daryl had no choice but to move forward. The seaside facilities were in ruins, and everywhere one looked, there was a post-apocalyptic wasteland. Yet, this couldn't deter Daryl from his path, as he had already been battle-hardened in this apocalyptic world. Daryl arrived at a coastal town that had lost all signs of human life. The corpses on the roadside were evidence of the town's catastrophic fate. He ventured into an abandoned ship in search of useful supplies. Before long, a nearby radio cassette player caught Daryl's attention. He quickly found some batteries and inserted them, hoping to find some clues. The cassette player began playing the voice of a man. Daryl picked up a photograph from the map. It turned out the man in the recording was the former owner of this ship. The recording detailed the man's experiences before his demise. He had come here to seek refuge, only to find that the place had fallen. Daryl finally learned that he was in the oldest city in France, Marseille. His situation was dire, and he couldn't remember how he ended up here from the United States. But the journey had to continue. Daryl needed to figure out why he was here and find his way back home. After a night of rest, Daryl decided to leave this place. Following the ship's owner's lead, he decided to head to Biarritz in the south of France, where there might be a harbor with transport to the United States. With his destination set, Daryl quickly gathered supplies. Due to the perilous journey ahead, he was prepared for the worst.
My name's Daryl Dixon. I come from a place called the Commonwealth. It's in America. I went out looking for something, and all I found was trouble. If I don't make it back, I want them to know I tried. Hell, I'm still trying.
So Daryl set out on the road alone, and he traveled day and night. Fortunately, he encountered no significant dangers on the way, and he eventually arrived near a small town. Ahead lay a factory, and Daryl pushed open the door, hoping to find some food. However, the sound of the door opening attracted nearby zombies. The zombies push over the vase in front of them and the sound attracts other zombies. And so, the entire factory of zombies began closing in on Daryl. Daryl faced danger without fear as he quickly dispatched the approaching zombies. However, what he didn't anticipate was the corrosive substance that clung to the zombies. Seizing an opportunity while Daryl was distracted, one of the zombies firmly gripped his arm, and a high concentration of sulfuric acid began eating away at his skin. He felt intense pain, but without hesitation, Daryl fought to break free from the zombies' grasp. Before long, he managed to clear out the zombies within the factory. Daryl successfully escaped from the factory, but the wound on his arm had worsened significantly. Lacking medical supplies, he could only temporarily clean the wound with water. The entire process was observed by a woman not far away. Daryl noticed her, but they didn't exchange any words. Adhering to the survival rule of avoiding unnecessary complications in the post-apocalyptic world, Daryl turned and walked away. Shortly after, he arrived at a farmhouse. Daryl cautiously entered, avoiding the makeshift alarm system on the floor. A noise from the side drew his attention. A woman was drawing water from a well. Not wanting to startle her, Daryl began to retreat. However, in doing so, he accidentally triggered a nearby device, causing a noise that caught the woman's attention. Daryl quickly raised his hands to signal his goodwill. At that moment, an elderly man stepped out of the house. Since they were communicating in French, Daryl couldn't understand their conversation. Fortunately, The woman could speak English. After a brief conversation, they began to lower their guard. Daryl expressed his desire to trade for some food, and the woman gladly agreed. He could take the fruit from the crate to satisfy his hunger. Daryl wasted no time and helped himself, taking a few apples and putting them in his bag. The woman, seeing the American in front of her, continued to express her kindness and introduced herself as Maribel. The elderly man also greeted Daryl warmly, expressing his wish to go to America together. Daryl, ever cautious, did not immediately respond. He simply stated that in the post-apocalyptic world, there was no longer a distinction between countries. Just then, a car pulled up. The armed man in the vehicle signaled for Daryl to drop his weapon and sit to the side. Sensing the impending danger, Daryl complied. The man and Maribel conversed in French, and Daryl couldn't understand a word. At that moment, the man forcefully grabbed Maribel, attempting to pull her into the car. Seeing the situation turn dire, Daryl swiftly grabbed a knife and, taking advantage of the guard's distraction, dealt a fatal blow to him. When Michel saw his men killed, he grabbed his gun and fired. Daryl fell to the ground in an instant. In this critical moment, Maribel struck him down with a heavy blow from behind. Maribel then took her weapon and stuck it in Michel's chest. Crisis solved. Daryl was badly hurt and wanted Maribel to hand him a medical kit. To his surprise, behind him they suddenly removed their disguises. Guillaume removed his eye patch and approached Daryl, striking him on the head with a club, rendering him unconscious. They then began searching through his backpack. Daryl, in a daze, vaguely noticed the woman who had been following him before had now appeared here. Subsequently, he fell into unconsciousness. While in a state of slumber, Daryl recalled the scenes of his departure, memories of Judith and Carol, and his promise to find Rick and Michonne and bring them back home. Before long, Daryl began regaining consciousness. At that moment, two nuns hurriedly entered the room and gagged him with a cloth. Then another nun, speaking a language Daryl didn't understand, took out a fire stick and burned Daryl's arm with stick after stick. The screams echoed throughout the church. The next morning Daryl woke up from his sleep, which had been quite restful. Before long, a nun entered the room and greeted Daryl, introducing herself as Isabelle. Seeing that Daryl remained silent, Isabelle proceeded to examine the wound on Daryl's arm. Isabelle explained to Daryl that cauterization was the best way to prevent the spread of infection, and their intention the previous night had been to help Daryl save his arm. In an effort to avoid infection, Isabelle had even prepared hot water. Following this, Isabelle took Daryl on a tour of the ancient monastery. Inside, most of the inhabitants were nuns and orphans who lived harmoniously, farming and scavenging to sustain themselves. They got along well with each other. Medieval churches generally had armories, and the nuns learned how to use weapons just in case. In the post-apocalyptic world, they had to learn how to protect themselves. The farming techniques in the church were quite advanced, and they were self-sufficient in terms of food. The nuns warmly greeted Daryl, and soon, a young boy approached him, displaying great affection for Daryl. The two of them engaged in lengthy conversations, and as Laurent observed Daryl's heavy-hearted demeanor, he continued to offer words of encouragement and support. Maribel and her grandfather are on their way when a car approaches, led by a man with a fierce look on his face. It turns out that the men Daryl killed were his men, and they're here to find out what happened to them. After some probing, he suspected that Maribel had information about their whereabouts. To force Maribel to speak, the man struck Guillaume down with a club. Maribel was frightened by the scene before her and had no choice but to lead them back to the farmhouse. Seeing the bodies of his henchmen, the man was furious. In a bid to protect herself, Maribel falsely claimed that Daryl had robbed them. The man became somewhat uneasy because one of the henchmen was his brother. Just then, a noise from the side caught everyone's attention. Michel, slowly walking towards them, had now turned into a zombie. Witnessing his own brother in such a state, the man was tormented. However, the situation had become inevitable. The man picked up a knife and personally put an end to his brother's existence. Subsequently, one of his henchmen noticed Daryl's bloodstains and an adjacent piece of paper. The man recognized the notice. Isabelle, the nun from the monastery, had always been recruiting survivors through this notice. There had to be a connection. The man immediately decided to head to the monastery. Meanwhile, the people at the monastery were unaware of the impending danger. Laurent was reciting poetry. Daryl hears a noise and walks over. A zombie appears in front of them. Isabelle came along and told Laurent to leave and tried to explain it to Daryl. However, Laurent remained calm and told Daryl that this was Père Jean, the leader of the monastery. Daryl, an atheist, didn't believe in the existence of a god in the post-apocalyptic world, and he thought there was something sinister about the monastery, possibly involving witchcraft, but none of that mattered at the moment. Daryl simply wanted to leave. Seeing that they couldn't detain Daryl, Isabelle finally revealed the truth. She showed Daryl a piece of paper with a drawing of a man crossing the sea. A man who bore a striking resemblance to Daryl. Daryl couldn't help but think Laurent's drawing skills were rather poor. However, this painting was done 3 weeks before Daryl came here. Isabelle told Daryl that they have a union called the Union of Hope. The leader of the alliance was a Buddhist monk who had passed through the monastery during a pilgrimage. When he saw Laurent, he saw something special, an answer to a prophecy. The alliance had a base in northern France, and they wanted to nurture Laurent. 6 months ago, the monk sent word, hoping they would send Laurent to the base. Unfortunately, Père Jean, who was responsible for escorting Laurent, met with an accident. Isabelle asked Daryl to escort Laurent. Laurent had special abilities. He could see things that others couldn't. Daryl doesn't believe Isabelle's bullshit. He's looking for a weapon to use, and he just wants to get out of here. He's seen the Last of Us storyline before. Isabelle is still trying to persuade Daryl because she believes that the base will raise Laurent to be what the prophecy says he is, and the Messiah is Jesus Christ. Daryl doesn't believe that. He just wants to find his way home. The nun believed that everything happened for a reason, and Le Havre had a port where there were rumored to be frequent ships. The marked route on the map was Père Jean's plan to take Laurent northward. Along this route were some of the Alliance's checkpoints that could assist them. Heading north was dangerous and fraught with challenges, and Daryl's lack of French made reaching the port a daunting task. Laurent was fluent in French, and the final destination on the route was very close to the port. So, the best choice was to take Laurent north. Daryl realized he had been deceived and picked up his weapons. Intending to leave, Daryl had just left the house when he ran into Laurent, who told him,
Nous nous reverrons. It means we shall meet again.
Daryl, when he heard that, he just replied silently to the nuns.
Ain't my problem.
Daryl then left the convent. However, he hadn't gone far when the sound of approaching vehicles caught his attention. He quickly hid behind a nearby tree. A heavily armed group of people was approaching, and judging by their direction, they were likely heading to the monastery. Daryl felt a deep sense of concern. Before long, they arrived at the entrance of the monastery. As soon as they arrived, they made it clear that the purpose of their journey was to find the American. The elderly nun recognized the man before her, Cadron, a notorious local gang leader. Seeing that she couldn't stop him, she reluctantly allowed them to enter. Isabelle, realizing the impending danger, hurriedly concealed Laurent. Then, she distributed weapons to the nuns, preparing for an inevitable battle. The well-trained nuns quickly armed themselves, while Isabelle decided to confront Cadron alone. Cadron produced the notice, and Isabelle vehemently denied it. Naturally, Cadron didn't believe her and immediately ordered his men to search the premises. Before long, they noticed the hidden chamber where Laurent was hiding. Just as he was about to force his way in, the shouts of his men came from outside, and it turned out that they had discovered the presence of Père Jean. Cadron saw the weakness of the nuns and ordered them to hand over Daryl or kill Père Jean. Yet the man and the priest were acquainted, and he was somewhat unable to make a move. The nuns pleaded desperately, but Cadron continued to pressure the man. In the end, the man killed Père Jean. Witnessing Père Jean being stabbed to death, Laurent rushed out. Père Jean had taken great care of him, and even when he turned into a zombie, Laurent still cared deeply for him. Upon seeing the boy, Cadron wanted to recruit him into his group. Daryl intervened just in time, dispatching one of Cadron's men with a swift strike. The battle began in earnest as both sides split up. The three of them look at the armed nuns in front of them in disbelief. Nevertheless, a fierce battle ensued. Meanwhile, Daryl displayed his combat skills. Catching Cadron's men off guard, he quickly dispatched Cadron's accompanying henchmen. However, Daryl was at a disadvantage in his one-on-one fight against Cadron. Cadron was a formidable opponent, and he managed to overpower Daryl, pinning him to the ground. As Cadron was about to deliver a fatal blow, Isabelle intervened, delivering a powerful axe strike that injured Cadron's arm. Without his weapon, Cadron ran for his life. Daryl rushed to fire, but missed Cadron's vitals. Daryl rushes out the door, but his gun is empty. Cadron managed to escape, leaving Daryl frustrated. When Daryl returned to the monastery, he was shocked by the devastating scene before him. The nuns, with whom he had spent the last few days, had all perished inside. The sudden appearance of the zombies also awakened the tiger in Daryl. When he entered the house, the old nun is also seriously injured, and on her deathbed she still believes Laurent is the cure for this sick world. At night, in the convent, a few people began to work on the aftermath. Though they mourned the loss of their companions, they knew they had to press on. The main characters were now united, determined to take Laurent northward with them. Meanwhile, in the northern port of Le Havre, the soldiers were discussing the escape of a prisoner. A woman approached them, questioning the crew about the prisoner's escape. The crew nervously explained that an American had caused chaos on the ship, resulting in the loss of many experimental subjects. The doctor hurriedly assured the woman that there were still some subjects available for their experiments. Looking at the approaching zombies and the crew discussing the prisoners who had fallen overboard, the answer to the mystery of Daryl's arrival in France was hidden on this ship. The latest episode of the 2023 zombie TV series The Walking Dead, Daryl Dixon, is absolutely amazing. The second episode is filled with thrilling and captivating content. Romantic Paris, France is turned into hell on earth. The true man, Daryl, shows his incredible prowess in dealing with the zombie threat. New setting surprises zombies reproducing offspring. I highly recommend everyone to watch the original series. Without further ado, let's get started. The midnight hour in Paris always has a captivating allure. Isabelle, resembling a glamorous lady, prepares to embark on her nocturnal adventure. This is a place that can create the most romantic atmosphere, but it's also a city where love can easily evaporate. The dim light attracts one hungry and needy soul after another. Isabelle is intoxicated, and after venting her emotions she chooses to leave. Alcohol and hormones are not the purpose of her visit. After obtaining 2 wristwatches, Isabelle hastily departs from the bar. She was once again under the tower enjoying the wonderful night view. Suddenly, a commotion nearby grabs her attention. A man is suddenly attacked by a stranger, and a vehicle careens out of control into the crowd. Isabelle is terrified and quickly retreats. She then heads to the subway station. The recent events have left Isabelle shaken, but she doesn't dwell on them until the subway slowly approaches, and something even more horrifying unfolds inside the train carriage. Before Isabelle could react, several zombies appeared on the platform, and the humans ran away in fear. Isabelle rushes out of the subway station to the surface, but the situation outside is even worse. Traffic is in chaos, and people are scattering in all directions. Isabelle is at a loss. She walks over to the scene of a car accident to check on the driver's condition. However, in the next moment, the driver's contorted body stands up and slowly approaches Isabelle. Isabelle, seeking help, is shocked to find the same situation behind her. Isabelle finally understands why people on the streets are desperate to flee. As she watches the zombies closing in step by step, Isabelle panics. Luckily, at the critical moment, a stylish BMW comes to her rescue. Isabelle's boyfriend, Quinn, signals for her to get in. They have no choice but to drive away from the city center. Isabelle watches in terror as everything unfolds. Soon, they arrive at Isabelle's residence. She plans to return and pack her belongings, but more importantly, she intends to take her sister with her. Lily, who has just woken up from a nap, is unaware of the events outside. Isabelle persuades Lily, albeit reluctantly, to leave. They drive away from the city center, hoping to escape the crisis. The car's radio broadcasts government notices, with the military urging residents to stay home and remain calm. Suddenly, Lily begins to feel unwell, and they decide to stop at a gas station for a short break. Watching Lily's pale complexion, Quinn suggests seeking medical help. Unexpectedly, Lily repeatedly refuses, claiming that she only needs a few minutes of rest. But in the next moment, Isabelle learns the truth. Lily is pregnant. Quinn seems to understand the situation and urgently pulls Isabelle aside. He tells her that they cannot take Lily with them in these circumstances. The place they are heading to has no children's hospital, and they must leave this area as soon as possible. With potential threats all around, bringing Lily would only be a burden. Quinn then passionately confesses his love for Isabelle, promising a future together. But what Quinn doesn't know is how Isabelle would ever give up on her sister. Seizing the moment when Quinn leaves, Isabelle quickly drives away from the gas station with her sister. Soon after, an ambulance on the road catches Isabelle's attention, and she stops to seek help. To her horror, the people inside the ambulance have already turned into zombies. They make a hasty escape, but one of the zombies grabs Lily's hand and begins to gnaw on it. Lily struggles desperately and manages to close the car door. They speed away from the scene. They drove farther and farther away until they came to a church at night. Lily's condition worsens, and Isabelle is desperate. A nun opens the church door and welcomes them inside without hesitation. Later, the priest from the church also comes out. Seeing the bite marks on Lily's arm, the priest takes her into the church and provides clean clothes. Isabelle, watching her weakened sister, feels heartbroken. These sisters have relied on each other since they lost their parents, and Isabelle has always been the one taking care of her sister. Isabelle asks about the child's father, but before she can get an answer, Lily starts screaming loudly. The child is about to be born. In the urgency of the situation, the priest and the nun assist Lily in childbirth. However, no matter how hard Lily tries, the baby won't come out smoothly until Lily exhausts her last breath. Looking at her sister who had lost her breath, Isabelle, she didn't give up. She kept calling out her sister's name from the bedside. Also unwilling to give up was the priest. After a moment, Lily's fingers suddenly moved. Isabelle looked at her sister in disbelief, thinking she had come back to life. But in the next moment, Lily suddenly opens her eyes. Isabelle realizes that her sister has turned into a zombie. The nun quickly brings a cloth to restrain Lily. The surgical knife is ready. After a lot of effort, they finally manage to extract the baby from Lily's womb. The nun takes the baby aside to examine it. With the baby's cries filling the room, they confirm that the child is healthy. Even the priest is amazed. It's nothing short of a miracle. The nun hands the baby to Isabelle. The low growls of the zombies outside contrast sharply with the baby's cries. The priest gestures for Isabelle to leave with the child. Isabelle takes one last look at her sister before finally leaving the room. This is how Isabelle and Laurent end up living in the convent. Until Daryl's appearance, Daryl has never had faith. Cultivating faith in this dark and bloody post-apocalyptic world was a nonsense to him. As a result of the events at the convent, the few nuns there were died in the fighting. The once peaceful courtyard was now filled with bloody corpses. Daryl knew that all this trouble was of his making. So, he accepted the task given to him by the nuns to escort Laurent to the Union of Hope's base in northern France. However, the journey was long and perilous, requiring them to devise a safe route. Daryl wanted to follow the priest's directions through Paris. Instead, Isabelle chose to detour through Angers, where she knew people. Moreover, Isabelle's friend possessed a radio that could directly contact the base up north. Daryl was puzzled since the route had been devised by the priest, and taking the detour through Angers would make the journey longer. Isabelle remained silent. Daryl soon realized that Paris had already descended into chaos. They prepared to set out. Laurent, as usual, was talkative, always seeking someone to chat with. Daryl's responses were cleverly concise. Just then, the donkey came to a halt, refusing to move no matter what. Daryl was the first to sense something amiss. Sure enough, several zombies suddenly appeared ahead. Isabelle and the others quickly went on high alert. At this moment, Daryl decided on a different approach. He untied the reins, preparing to use the donkey as bait. Daryl acted decisively, firing a shot into the sky. Startled, the donkey charged straight into the group of zombies. This tactic proved to be effective as the zombies chased the donkey. Now without transport they had to continue on foot. However, it was getting late, and they needed to find a place to stay as soon as possible. Just then, they heard whistling from the surroundings. A crossbow bolt was fired at Daryl, prompting them to quickly locate the enemy's position. Seeing that there was only one person, Daryl chased after them. The individual was surprisingly fast and disappeared in no time. But in the next moment, this hit knocked Daryl down to the ground directly. Daryl should start paying more attention to what's behind him. Daryl and the others became captives and were taken to a school. Daryl feels a bit frustrated. Soon, they were ushered into the school, and Daryl was forcefully made to kneel upon entering. Isabelle and her group received relatively better treatment because the children understood that Daryl was the only potential threat. Moments later, the boys howled like wolves, seemingly awaiting the arrival of their leader. Before long, a girl descended the stairs and inquired about the purpose of Isabelle's group's visit. Isabelle explained that they meant no harm and were stranded here because their donkey had run off during the journey. Isabelle then mentioned that she was a nun. To ensure the authenticity of Isabelle's claim, the girl asked them to recite a prayer. This was no problem for Isabelle. They recited the prayer perfectly. The girl was a believer too, so she believed them. However, her gaze then turned towards Daryl, who had remained silent. Isabelle improvised and lied that Daryl was Father Daryl, a preacher from America from long ago. And so, Daryl and the rest of the group managed to break free from their predicament. The girl went by the name Lou, and she proceeded to give them a tour of the school. It's hard to imagine how a group of children have survived so long in the middle of a post-apocalyptic world, and even managed to keep the school in good order. Lou explained that they relied on hunting, farming, sewing clothes, and even organized their own study sessions to stay alive. Staying together and helping each other was their key to survival. Isabelle marveled at Lou's leadership. However, Lou led them to another room, where an elderly woman lay in bed. Lou introduced her as Mrs. Du Bois, the one who had taught everything to the children. Unfortunately, Mrs. Du Bois had fallen seriously ill, and her condition was grim. Without medication, Mrs. Du Bois had been battling the illness for several months. They later joined the children for dinner. The conditions here were surprisingly good, with an abundance of food supporting the quality of their meal. Since they were all religious, they began the meal with a prayer. Father Daryl was slightly embarrassed, but he had to improvise. Fortunately, Daryl did well, delivering a sincere and heartfelt speech that diffused the awkwardness. Isabelle couldn't help but secretly admire Daryl's talent. However, Daryl is even more talented in this part. After dinner, Daryl seeks Lou's help as he wants a donkey for the journey. One of the boys mentioned a person named Gaines. Lou added that Gaines lived not far away in a castle and had a horse. He also had a lot of supplies collected from the village. The only problem was that he wasn't very friendly. Daryl wanted Lou to accompany him to the castle. However, Lou outright refused, as they had suffered greatly at the hands of Gaines before. Daryl argued that if Gaines had ransacked supplies, he must have raided a pharmacy as well. To save Mrs. Du Bois, they needed to go to the castle in search of medicine. Daryl's proposal gained the approval of the others. Mrs. Du Bois was like a mother to all of them, and they had to find a way to save her. Later, all the school's children gathered in a classroom. Daryl had no idea what was happening. Then, a remarkable sight unfolded. Two boys operated a makeshift generator, and miraculously, a movie played on the television screen. The children were delighted, and even Daryl found it unbelievable. To watch a movie so leisurely in the midst of the apocalypse was an exciting experience for everyone present. Everyone had smiles on their faces, except for Daryl, who eventually became melancholic. As night fell, there was only one vacant room left in the school. Inside the room, there was only one bed, and Isabelle declined Daryl's offer to sleep on the floor. They talked for a long time, and the conversation eventually turned to the movie they had just watched. And then Daryl revealed his feelings. The movie they had watched was one Daryl had seen when he was a child. The person he watched it with was his brother, Merle. Daryl valued relationships deeply. The next day, Daryl and Lou set out for the castle to infiltrate it. They had two options, the drawbridge at the entrance or the moat. However, the moat was already swarming with zombies, so Daryl had no choice but to use the drawbridge. They quickly reached a nearby warehouse and finally found suitable tools. When Lou wasn't looking, Daryl swiftly closed the warehouse door. He knew that if anything happened to Lou, the school's children would struggle to survive. Daryl then approached the drawbridge and, with the help of the tools, successfully made his way into the castle. Inside, he indeed found a horse, but there were no other signs of people in the courtyard. Soon, Daryl located the storage room, which was stocked with supplies, including medications. However, at that moment, he heard a noise nearby. Daryl picked up his gun and ventured outside. Following the sound, he found a basement where a boy was being held captive. Daryl suspected that he was one of the school's children, and Ellison confirmed this. Daryl planned to escape with Ellison, but before they could leave, a gunshot rang out, and a bullet narrowly missed them. It was Gaines. They began to fire wildly at each other, neither side gaining the upper hand. Daryl quickly handed the gun to Ellison, who started engaging with Gaines. Daryl slipped out and snuck up to the loft while the ammo was changing. Soon, Daryl was behind Gaines, with a knife against his neck. Gaines had no choice but to drop his weapon. To Daryl's surprise, when Gaines saw him, he became unusually excited. It turned out that Gaines was also an American, and he enthusiastically showed Daryl all of his possessions. He even had over 40 boxes of toothpaste. Gaines wanted to share it with Daryl, but Daryl was not impressed, because Daryl knew that these supplies were stolen by Gaines from the relief supplies. He couldn't trust the man before him. Daryl then took Gaines to the square. Ellison, knowing that Gaines had harmed many of the school's children, suggested that Daryl throw him into the pile of zombies. However, Daryl didn't do that and decided to leave the decision to Lou. Gaines is a little panicked and goes to the school where he'll never get away with it. Gaines tried to gain sympathy by revealing that he had a wife and 4 children waiting for him back in Texas. At that moment, he believed that the United States had not been affected by the zombie crisis, and that's when Gaines' defenses collapsed. Then Daryl pulled a wagon with supplies and prepared to return. Unfortunately, the cart's wheel suddenly broke down. As Daryl inspected the wheel, Gaines seized the opportunity to grab a weapon. Both of them struggled, and in a moment of inattention, they both fell into the moat surrounding the castle. Daryl was lucky enough to have a weapon to deal with the zombies. Gaines, on the other hand, was trapped by a rope and helplessly watched as the zombies devoured him. However, There were too many zombies for Daryl to handle alone. In a critical moment, Daryl picked up a firearm and quickly aimed at an explosive canister. An explosion resounded, creating a bloody path for him to escape. After a brief bout of ringing in his ears, Daryl got back on his feet. There were still many zombies in the moat, and he needed to find a way out quickly. Suddenly, a zombie approached him, but just in time, a crossbow bolt shot through the air, saving him. It was Lou and her group who had come to the rescue. They successfully left the castle. Lou had also brought back the medication for Mrs. Dubois, and the children cheered as they gathered around. Unfortunately, the sad news came that Mrs. Dubois had passed away. Lou felt guilty as she returned late and couldn't save Mrs. Dubois in time. Daryl stepped forward and explained that his visit to the castle had been driven by his own agenda to find a horse. He couldn't guarantee that the medication would help Mrs. Dubois. Lou didn't blame Daryl and, after everyone had left, she sat alone by Mrs. Dubois's side, thanking her for everything she had done and for educating the children. The next day, the children at the school held a farewell ceremony for Mrs. Dubois. Daryl and his group had prepared the horse-drawn carriage and embarked on their journey once again. Meanwhile, in the monastery on the other side, Cadron, leaning on his cane, walked in. He was upset that all his loyal men had died, and that it was all Daryl's fault. Cadron silently vowed to make Daryl pay with blood for his actions. This is definitely the most disgusting episode in the Walking Dead series. A man has trained zombies into a symphony orchestra, complete with violins, a pianist, and a drummer. The level of gore in the visuals is absolutely nauseating. Just recently, Daryl and the others set out for the Alliance's base. However, Isabelle strongly opposes the originally planned route because she witnessed the catastrophe that befell Paris. So, the carriage had to detour to Angers. Fortunately, things went relatively smoothly after leaving the school, and they safely reached their destination. There was an Alliance contact here and he had a radio so he could keep in touch with the base. Before long, the carriage came to a halt. Daryl left his weapons with the nun to watch over the carriage and Laurent, while he and Isabelle quietly sneaked into the house. Before the apocalypse, this place used to be a theater. As Isabelle informed Daryl, the contact person was a musician. Soon, the conductor voluntarily emerged. Perhaps due to not having seen a living person for so long, the conductor was unusually excited, and his eyes lit up when he saw Daryl. Because the conductor could speak English, he was eager to show off to a living person. Daryl didn't want to chat with him, he just wanted to find the radio as quickly as possible. Subsequently, the conductor led the two of them into the basement, where, as expected, there was a device. Daryl rushed forward to fiddle with it, but no matter what he did, the radio wouldn't turn on, so Daryl had to turn to the conductor for help, to which the conductor replied bizarrely. It turned out that the conductor had dismantled the main components of the radio and used them for what he considered a more important purpose, a phonograph. As the music started playing, the conductor hurriedly led them out. Isabelle and Daryl were then left in shock by what they saw. The conductor was completely insane. He had organized zombies into a symphony orchestra. He played on stage while the zombies played their instruments around him. However, the scene was so bizarre rather than disgusting, so don't watch this part of the original film, guys. Daryl regretted that he had encountered such a madman after making a detour to get here. So, he quickly pulled Isabelle away. Just as they stepped out, a zombie was about to attack the carriage. The nun hesitated for a long time and didn't dare to act. Daryl had to take the gun and shoot it down, but this gunshot attracted nearby zombies, and they had to leave quickly. Daryl decided to stick to the original plan and head straight to Paris. Soon they were outside the city, which looked like a dead city. However, Laurent seemed remarkably excited because he was born after the apocalypse and had never seen these magnificent buildings. He had no idea of Paris's former splendor. They walked along the streets, occasionally stopping, and quickly arrived at a cemetery where many famous individuals were buried. Laurent, a veritable fountain of knowledge, narrated their names and stories, becoming the guide to the graveyard for Daryl. Daryl, too, came to a stop at this point.
Jim Morrison.
Who's that?
He was an American rock star. He was in a band called The Doors.
Jim Morrison, an American, now resting in Paris, Laurent quipped randomly.
Not to fret, Monsieur Daryl. You will not die in Paris.
Just as they were preparing to continue their journey, a group of people suddenly appeared, blocking their path. Isabelle hurriedly gave the code word, and it turned out that this person was the contact for the Paris base. Fallon's gaze then fixed on Laurent. Isabelle nodded, and only then did Fallow smile. Fallow inquired about the whereabouts of Père Jean. Isabelle replied that Père Jean had met with an accident and that Daryl had been escorting them all the way. Fallow finally relaxed and introduced himself and his team members to Daryl. Fallow then leads them to the base, which is full of survivors and supplies. They managed this place with great efficiency, even having a restaurant and a kitchen. What was more surprising was that they had a garden. From the terrace of the garden, you can see the whole of Paris. Daryl wanted to find a way back home. Fallow was quite enthusiastic and immediately introduced Daryl to an elderly man who served as the communicator here. However, their method of communication puzzled Daryl. It turned out they had been relying on the most primitive means of communication, carrier pigeons. Daryl felt disappointed, thinking that Isabelle had deceived him. How could pigeons carry messages all the way to the United States? At this moment, Fallow suggested a solution. Paris had an underground black market where all kinds of goods were traded. But even in this post-apocalyptic world, information was a commodity, and they needed a form of currency to facilitate its exchange. Daryl tries to steal the currency, but Isabelle stops him. She took it upon herself to handle the currency situation. At that moment, Laurent was surrounded by a group of children, each eager to present him with gifts. Clearly, they all knew the myths surrounding Laurent. Laurent raised his head and looked at the woman upstairs, then quickly ascended the stairs. Fallow explained that the woman had lost her husband a few days ago, refused to eat, and resisted all attempts at comfort. No one had been able to make her feel better. However, after Laurent and the woman exchanged a few words, miraculously, the woman began to open up and release her pent-up emotions. It was a sight for all to see, as if they all believed that there was still hope for this sick world. On the other side, Caudron had also arrived in Paris. Here, there was a military base with a significant number of armed personnel. Caudron was led into an office where he met Janet, the leader of this establishment. In hopeless times, people often tend to follow orders, and Janet had managed to exert control over most of the cities in France through force. Caudron was one of Janet's subordinates, and he had come to Paris to present himself for consideration. Moreover, Caudron had brought a gift, Daryl's self-introduction tape recorder. As it turned out, the American who had escaped on the ship was indeed Daryl. Subsequently, Caudron revealed that Daryl had killed his brother, and he had come seeking assistance to eliminate Daryl. Janet was pleased with this revelation, and Caudron was immediately recruited. The group then proceeded to a laboratory where some kind of zombie experiment was taking place. A doctor nearby was taking notes. However, in the very next second, the zombies began to twitch uncontrollably, and then the zombies broke free. The unrestrained zombies charged at the glass and then exploded. The entire process lasted for 18 seconds. It seemed that Janet was trying to achieve a terrifying result through this experiment, and even Caudron felt uneasy witnessing it. The next morning, Isabelle and Daryl arrived at an apartment. This was Isabelle's home before the disaster. The interior was in disarray, but familiar items triggered memories for Isabelle. Isabelle forcefully lifted the iron door of the closet and retrieved an iron box from inside. It turned out that Isabelle wanted to fulfill promise. The box is full of possessions, and Isabelle is looking for something to trade to get information about the ship for Daryl. Daryl remained silent and started to admire the view outside the window. Isabelle informed Daryl that there were many bars on the street and numerous tourists passing by. She had expected the world to become a better place, but it had turned out to be so dire. After packing up their belongings, they prepared to leave. As soon as Daryl opened the front door, they were confronted by several zombies outside. Luckily, the apartment had a back door, and they hurriedly made their way through it. After traversing a staircase, they reached a courtyard where a child zombie blocked their path. Daryl was about to approach to deal with it when Isabelle immediately stopped him. As it turned out, the girl's name was Amy, and before the apocalypse, she had been Isabelle's neighbor. Isabelle and her sister had encountered Amy while fleeing, but they had only told her to go back and find her parents, not taking her with them. And now, Amy has become what she is now. Amy reached out her hand but accidentally knocked over a nearby flower pot, which quickly attracted nearby zombies. In pursuit of their prey, the zombies began falling one after another from above, creating a gruesome mess of blood and flesh. The exit door was already entangled with vines, and Daryl had to speed up the clearing process. Otherwise, the consequences would be dire. However, a more serious situation arose. Among the zombies were several sulfuric acid zombies with extremely corrosive properties. In a crucial moment, Daryl grabbed an iron rod and thrust it into the body of a zombie, then swiftly pushed the zombie toward the door. The high-concentration sulfuric acid corroded the vines, and the escape route finally opened, so they left that place. Later, Isabelle handed her sister's photo to Laurent. Laurent felt joyous as it was his first time seeing his mother's appearance. Soon, the group arrived at the underground black market. Fallu, experienced in these matters, presented a welcome gift and weapons. The guards allowed them entry. It's an underground crypt where the remains of 6 million Black Death victims are kept. Fallu informed Daryl that when the United States was just founded, Europeans had already survived many apocalyptic events. He believed that this time, they would surely survive. Soon the group arrives deep underground, where there are red lights, wine and dancing. Watching the scene in front of him, Daryl began to question if he had come to the wrong place. Fallu reassured him not to worry. Such places were more likely to find all sorts of things. Laurent, who had not experienced much of the world, looked around curiously. A seductive host entertained the crowd, and a glamorous singer performed beautiful songs, creating an atmosphere of boundless joy. People here seem to have completely forgotten about the end times crisis. Soon, Faru tells them a message confirming that someone here knows the whereabouts of the ship. However, they wanted to see Isabelle and the others' sincerity before sharing the information. Isabelle had to take out the candy she was carrying. The man seemed satisfied, as candies were a rarity in the post-apocalyptic world. As he was about to take them, Daryl intervened, understanding the principle of money first, then goods. However, the man explained that he knew who could help, and these goods were like a letter of introduction. After paying the money up front, he would take Isabelle to meet the person. Daryl didn't answer and then he looked around. The man on the side of the room made him wary. His instincts told him that he needed to leave this place as soon as possible. However, the man was not willing to let Daryl go, and they got into a physical altercation. Just at that moment, another man appeared, and he was none other than Isabelle's pre-apocalypse boyfriend, Quinn. Seeing Quinn, the man became submissive. Quinn had set a rule in the bar: no weapons allowed. Apparently, the man had violated this rule, so Quinn taught the man a lesson and promptly ejected him from the bar. Clearly, Quinn was the leader of this underground bar. At the center of the dance floor, Laurent was drawn to the music of the singer. During a break, he approached her and struck up a conversation. They chatted for a while, and the singer, full of enthusiasm, offered Laurent a necklace as a memento. Everyone who met Laurent seemed enthusiastic, and then he walked over to Isabelle. Quinn greeted Laurent, assuming he was Isabelle's child. Isabelle denied it and told Quinn it was Lily's baby. Quinn just smiled. The nun noticed the situation and quickly pulled Laurent away from there. In no time, they arrived in the basement, which was filled with a collection of artifacts and treasures. Now Quinn's private collection. Quinn inquired about Isabelle and Lily's recent experiences. Isabelle says she became a nun. Lily's dead. It turned out that Quinn was Laurent's father. Isabelle was shocked but not angry. Quinn wants to get back together with Isabelle and tells her about the good things they used to do. However, Isabelle expressed her current focus on helping her friend find their way home. Daryl, not wanting to obtain information through such means, grabbed Isabelle and left the place. After they left, Laurent and his group arrived at the bar. It was the first time someone had come armed, and the bar fell silent instantly. Quinn stated that he has reached an agreement with Janet, and the bar is off limits for them. Laurent says he's just looking for someone. Both sides had a common enemy, so they quickly reached an agreement. On the other side, as soon as Daryl returned to the camp, he wanted to leave. His mission was complete, and he believed he needed to find his own way home. Isabelle tried to persuade Daryl to stay, but she couldn't find a concrete reason. They don't see eye to eye. Daryl voiced many negative thoughts and even mentioned Quinn. Unbeknownst to them that Laurent overheard every word. Just then, a large group of armed militants stormed the camp. Laurent and his group had found them. As enemies crossed paths, their eyes filled with envy and resentment. Upon seeing Daryl, Laurent quickly chased after him. Daryl's fighting prowess was extraordinary, and despite Laurent's greater numbers, he was unable to gain the upper hand. They engaged in a swift, intense struggle. Daryl had regained his peak combat abilities, and Laurent was getting the short end of the stick, almost having his neck twisted by Daryl. At a crucial moment, Laurent's henchmen came to his rescue. Due to the overwhelming firepower of the opposition, Daryl had no choice but to flee. In the midst of the chaos indoors, where many survivors were injured, they could only escape. In the midst of the chaos, Laurent disappeared and Isabelle had to search for him. Seeing that the commotion outside had subsided a bit, Daryl, who had been hiding nearby, made a run for it. To his surprise, the building had become dangerously unstable after being subjected to the recent barrage of gunfire. This is the Eiffel Tower after the apocalypse, its structure long decayed, and its pinnacle shattered by airplane collisions. Laurent, filled with anticipation, arrived at the base of the tower because he felt it was the closest place to his mother. He approached the Eiffel Tower once again, attempting to pinpoint the exact spot where his mother had taken a photo years ago. However, the growling ahead drew his attention. Slowly, Laurent reached the edge of a barricade, only to realize that he was now in a predicament. Zombies, catching the scent of a living being, toppled obstacles and rushed towards Laurent eagerly. Daryl, having narrowly escaped Caudron's pursuit, found himself falling into the sewer as a building on the rooftop collapsed. He rushed to look for an exit, but he didn't realize that several passages were chained up. When a large number of zombies followed him, Laurent's figure also appeared on the side. Daryl quickly called his name, but Laurent seemed to be deaf. The zombies around him were closing in on Laurent, but he just closed his eyes and started praying. Daryl's heart was burning with anxiety, but no matter how he shouted and tapped the chain, Laurent and the zombies seemed to be deaf. By now the zombies had surrounded Laurent. Daryl, desperate, used a flashlight to assess the situation. Unexpectedly, the zombie horde simply passed by Laurent without attacking him. Daryl looked at the scene in disbelief. Daryl called out to Laurent again, but Laurent just smiled and turned to follow the zombies. With no other choice, Daryl had to accept this surreal reality. However, at that moment, a strong sense of suffocation overwhelmed Daryl. He opened his eyes and realized he was deep underwater. A zombie was about to drag him away. Daryl drew his knife and stabbed upward, then struggled to swim to the surface. Upon seeing the gaping hole in the rooftop, Daryl understood that Laurent's earlier scene was just his own hallucination. On the other side, survivor camp leader Caudron couldn't find Daryl and saw clues from the camp residents. Although Caudron didn't receive any news about Daryl, he accidentally learned about Laurent's extraordinary status among these people. Janet walked out. She had heard rumors of this special boy and had only thought of Laurent as a joke, but the woman's reply surprised her. The woman firmly believed that Laurent could save everyone. Hearing this, Janet's expression suddenly changed because she realized that these people had developed their own faith, making them challenging to control. Janet then turned her gaze to a crying baby nearby, reaching out to pick up the infant, terrified that Janet might harm her child. The woman pleaded desperately. Surprisingly, Janet only cradled the baby in her arms and comforted the infant. Caudron instantly understood the implications. Janet wouldn't allow any hope to exist within her order. The hope of Laurent and the Union of Hope had to be eliminated to prevent any uprising. They had to find Laurent quickly and erase him. Meanwhile, Daryl emerged from the sewer, seeking Isabelle's help to find Laurent. However, having been to her place only once, he struggled to locate Isabelle's residence. Luckily, Antoine happened to pass by. From him, Daryl learned that Caudron's forces were currently hunting Laurent. Time was of the essence, and Antoine prepared to take Daryl to Isabelle's place. However, a sudden sound of a car approaching interrupted them. Daryl urgently signaled Antoine to hide, leaving the bicycle behind. They concealed themselves around the corner, but the car came after them. Just as he got off the bike, the man realized that there was a pigeon cage in the bike, which made him so happy that he could have a good meal in the evening. The man directly loaded the cage onto the car. Antoine was also anxious about how he could let them take away these pigeons, which were his treasures. Antoine desperately pleaded with them to spare the pigeons. However, the other party paid no heed. In the post-apocalyptic world, lives were far less valuable than food. The man didn't hesitate to shoot. While the man mocked, a dagger struck him fatally, causing him to die instantly. Subsequently, Daryl, wielding a hammer, dealt with the man's accomplice. However, upon inspecting Antoine's wounds, Daryl realized it was too late. Antoine, bleeding profusely, was still concerned about his pigeons. Daryl then moved the cage from the car and placed it in front of Antoine. Daryl helped Antoine fulfill his last wish to release all the pigeons. Watching the pigeons fly away, Antoine finally closed his eyes. Following Antoine's guidance, Daryl arrived at Isabelle's residence. Isabelle was indeed there. Upon seeing each other, Isabelle embraced Daryl, genuinely worried about his well-being. Their previous conflicts dissipated, and now all they wanted was to find Laurent. Isabelle mentioned that Laurent was unfamiliar with Paris, and she had searched all night without finding any trace of him. She couldn't figure out where Laurent might have gone. Suddenly, Daryl spoke up, suggesting a place they could try. When they reached the Eiffel Tower, they discovered Laurent, but a large gathering of zombies had already amassed. Isabelle and Daryl had to engage in hand-to-hand combat, swiftly dispatching one zombie after another, but the number of zombies is too many to kill. Laurent, who has no attacking power at all, hides under an iron plate for shelter, but a zombie still finds him. In the critical moment, A mysterious man suddenly appeared, swiftly dispatching the zombie before grabbing Laurent and making a dash for the car. Daryl, sensing something amiss, immediately gave chase, but there were 3 of them. Although they pulled down 2 of them, the last one still took Laurent and left the place. They had no choice but to go back with their captive. Isabelle began interrogating him. Since the man wore the emblem of a believer around his neck, Isabelle identified herself as a nun after offering some advice. However, even after her attempts to persuade him, the man remained tight-lipped. Initially suspecting him as one of Janet's henchmen, Isabelle only realized the truth when the man brought up her painful past. The person who abducted Laurent was none other than her ex-boyfriend, Quinn. Isabelle's speculation was accurate. Laurent was now in Quinn's basement. As Laurent's father, Quinn had no intention of harming him, expressing a desire to make up for the lost time. Meanwhile, Isabelle and Daryl sought to extract information from the man, but he responded with insults and offered no useful information. Daryl knew this wasn't the way to go and he immediately punched the man in the face, but he still wouldn't talk. Daryl punched the man 2 more times, but the man still wouldn't talk. Daryl picks up his bayonet and stabs the man in the body. The man finally speaks. Quinn is trying to use Laurent to get Isabelle. He wants to renew his relationship with Isabelle. Seeing progress, Isabelle continued questioning. Were there other ways to enter Quinn's bar directly? The man denied it. Daryl grabbed a longer and sharper steel pipe, waving it menacingly in front of the man. The man was scared. Knowing Daryl's temper, he said that there was a secret passage, but it was also dangerous, and he could draw a map to guide them. Daryl doesn't buy it. The only thing better than a map is a guide. Thus, they divided into 3 paths, Fallah's group attacking the front door, Daryl leading the man through the secret passage into the bar, and Isabelle and another nun heading to rendezvous with headquarters. With Janet's influence in Paris too significant, they had to evacuate Laurent immediately after his rescue. At this moment, Quinn took the initiative to arrange a meeting with Janet. Well aware that Daryl would undoubtedly come to rescue Laurent, he initiated discussions about seeking revenge. Quinn proposed offering a famous Monet painting as part of their deal, and Janet readily agreed. Janet was aware of Quinn's character, placing great importance on transactions. However, when Janet mentioned Laurent, Quinn evasively brushed it off, clearly intending to protect him. Meanwhile, Daryl arrived at the designated location with the captive, confirming the existence of a hidden passage. Thus, the 2 smoothly entered the interior of the bar. On the other side, Fallah's team reached the front door, and a fierce battle quickly ensued. The guards were strong. Fallah and his team could not attack for a long time, but they could only delay to buy Daryl a chance. At this moment, there are also movements coming from the tunnels. The terrain here was exceedingly intricate, accompanied by the echoing growls of zombies. The tunnels were like a maze. Luckily Daryl had his captive with him, otherwise Daryl would have had a hard time getting out even with a map. However, at a corner, the man played a trick, delivering a sudden punch when Daryl was off guard before swiftly escaping. Daryl immediately gave chase. At last the man stopped in a passage not far away. By this time his left leg was wounded, and if no one helped him he could only wait for death. Daryl interrogated him about the upcoming route, and the man, compelled by the strong instinct to survive, revealed the truth. The man thought Daryl would take him away.
A door? Yes, a door. Let's go. Let's go. Bon appetit. No.
And so the man is eaten by the zombies. Daryl successfully entered the bar's interior, encountering minimal resistance as most guards were concentrated at the front door. He quickly located Laurent's basement. At the same time, Laurent was engaged in a conversation with Anna. Despite being Quinn's subordinate, Anna harbored no ill intentions and did not obstruct their departure. Quinn, checking the situation at the front door, sensed something amiss. Realizing he had been deceived, he immediately returned to the basement. Quinn runs into Daryl, who is running away, and they get into a fight. However, Quinn was no match for Daryl, who quickly subdued him. Laurent watched on from the sidelines, a sense of discomfort evident on his face. While preparing to end Quinn with a knife, Daryl glanced at Laurent and ultimately abandoned the decision. On the other side, Fallah and his team had already withdrawn. Fallah informed Isabelle that Janet had begun amassing troops outside the city, preparing to set up a trap. They needed to escape quickly. Isabelle, anxiously concerned, was relieved when Daryl arrived with Laurent. Daryl urged them to leave promptly, but Isabelle revealed her inner decision to resist Janet's soldiers taking over the city. They needed someone capable, and Quinn was the best candidate. For Laurent's safe exit, they had to rely on Quinn's assistance. Isabelle knew Quinn desired her, and if she chose to stay, he would agree to help. The path ahead could only be navigated by Daryl, leading Laurent forward. Daryl strongly opposed Isabelle staying behind, but lacking a foolproof plan, they reluctantly accepted Isabelle's arrangement. So Daryl and Laurent left on the boat, and Isabelle went to the pub alone. A distraught Quinn looks meaningfully at Isabelle in front of him. Daryl's zombie hunting skills are truly remarkable. While others typically need to form groups to tackle 3 to 5 zombies, he effortlessly takes on 10 or more by himself. His survival index in the post-apocalyptic world is off the charts. However, in the spin-off series, Daryl's combat abilities seem to be slightly diminished. Upon spotting an enemy, Daryl, ready to ambush, grabs a hammer and moves in for the attack. And it turns out, 5 episodes into the series, Daryl kneels 3 times, which is slightly embarrassing. This scene unfolds as Daryl departs from the federal community in search of Rick and Michonne. He embarks on a solo journey, pushing his motorcycle slowly due to a lack of gasoline. Suddenly, a car approaches, prompting Daryl to instinctively draw his knife in caution. In a post-apocalyptic world, trust is a rare commodity. A man, seemingly benign, offers assistance, but Daryl declines. After a brief conversation, it becomes evident that the man means no harm. Daryl then requests a supply of gasoline, and the man, named Jones, leads him to a nearby camp with plenty of tools and male survivors. Remaining vigilant, Daryl sits apart from the group, observing. Jones gathers everyone and announces the camp's rules. These survivors are recent additions, and any adult male who can capture zombies is rewarded with a fixed amount of gasoline, with even more for capturing fresh ones. They are free to use the weapons and tools on the wall. As the group prepares for a zombie hunting mission, TJ believes that teamwork would increase their chances of success. However, an elderly man scoffs at him, dismissing him as a liability due to his small stature. Daryl takes notice of this young boy. Then the hunt begins. Although Daryl has always been a lone wolf, it doesn't affect his combat prowess in the slightest. This scene astounds everyone. Jones expresses satisfaction, and Daryl smoothly earns his day's reward. At this time, TJ came over. He saw Daryl's combat strength so tough TJ wanted to team up with Daryl.
They look like I need help.
Night falls quickly. Undaunted, TJ approached the men again, seeking them to form a team. Obviously, the weak will only be eliminated in the end of the world. Since no one helps him, he can't secure resources. After some mocking, the men offer TJ a part-time job chopping wood, ensuring their heating for the night, and possibly including him in tomorrow's hunting party. However, TJ struggles even with the basic task of chopping wood. Unable to bear it, Daryl steps in, offering hands-on guidance on how to split logs. Fortunately, TJ learns quickly, leading to some simple exchanges between them. Daryl noticed that Jones had a radio in his office, so Daryl went after him. The signal is weak, and despite multiple attempts, Daryl can't establish contact with the outside world. As he prepares to leave, the signal comes through, and it's Carol's voice. Both are concerned about each other's well-being. Just as they were talking, something suddenly happened on Carol's side, and Daryl was asking about it when the radio signal got worse and worse. An anxious Daryl decides to return to the community the next morning, but then the hunting party returned to the camp. TJ appeared in the lineup, only now he had been turned into a zombie. Looking at the strangulation marks on TJ's neck, Daryl surmises that they are man-made. Juno, however, denies it, and Daryl punches Juno in the face. Reality is harsh. People here prioritize resources over a single life, and fresh zombies are more valuable. Daryl, outraged, is helpless. They were punished for violating the camp's no-fighting rule, and were taken by soldiers to a ship with a large number of controlled zombies. The camp's frequently seen doctor is also on this ship. They were locked in the same cell. Daryl took the opportunity to carefully observe the surroundings. Soon, the cell door swung open, and several guards entered, wielding iron rods to subdue the men in the front row. The men were then taken away. What happened next even made Daryl uneasy. The group opened a cage containing countless zombies. The man was thrown into the cage, and screams of agony immediately filled the air. Then, Daryl became the next target. As the cage opened, zombies eagerly anticipated their midnight snack. However, Daryl wasn't one to sit idly by. Seizing the moment when the guards were distracted, he swiftly pushed one person down, quickly dealt with those around him, and even managed to swap jackets. Daryl produced the guards' keys and opened all the cell doors. Both zombies and living people were set free. and even Juno followed Daryl. Chaos erupted on the ship in an instant. The guards were already trapped by the zombies and had no time to worry about the escaped prisoners. Daryl and Juno seized the opportunity to reach the lifeboat, but Juno couldn't read the instructions and couldn't lower the escape pod. To make matters worse, a particularly agile zombie broke free and headed straight for them, attacking other zombies along the way. Surprisingly, instead of feasting on the corpse, the zombies turned their attention directly toward Daryl. In a critical moment, Daryl struck the zombie's head with a bat, but it rose again as if unaffected. With no other choice, Daryl jumped ship to ensure his own safety. This way, the enigma of Daryl's oceanic journey finally unraveled. Back in the present, they are sailing away from Paris, headed for the Union of Hope's headquarters. Their destination. Upon landing, Aslan leads them to a temporary resting place. Daryl had taught Laurent fishing skills. Feeling that the nuns were coddling him too much, Daryl wants Laurent to acquire more survival skills, but Laurent doesn't want to. After some time apart, Laurent misses Isabelle a lot, and Daryl understands his sentiments. Late at night, as they began to take turns resting, Daryl suddenly woke up. It turned out that there was trouble at their resting place. A zombie had managed to breach their defenses. After swiftly dealing with it, Daryl went outside to assess the situation. 2 zombies lay on the ground. Soon, Aslan's voice reached him, but his condition was dire. During the fight with the zombies, Aslan was injured. While he had managed to dispatch 2 zombies, something had struck him in the back, leaving him in critical condition. Daryl wanted to approach and help, but Aslan warned him. His entire body was covered in acidic zombie blood, and there was no chance of survival. In his final moments, Aslan handed Daryl a pocket watch, which had a photo indicating the location of the next rendezvous point. Aslan told Daryl to take care of Laurent and then closed his eyes. Early the next morning, Daryl gave Aslan a dignified burial. After a brief farewell, the two prepared to set sail once again. However, upon reaching the riverside, Daryl discovered the boat was missing. Fuming, he cursed the situation. Upon inspecting the cut rope, Daryl seemed to realize something. Seeing the evasive look in Laurent's eyes, Daryl confirmed his suspicion. Laurent had cut the rope. Daryl wanted an explanation, but Laurent remained silent. Daryl was furious. How hard it had been for them to get this far. So many people had died. Laurent's thoughts were simple. He didn't want to be alone. It finally dawned on Daryl that he had placed too many expectations on Laurent, who, after all, was just a child. Even though they had resolved the tension between them, without transportation, they had no choice but to proceed on foot. As they walked, the distant sound of a car reached their ears, prompting them to take cover. Seeing the vehicle, Daryl is tempted to hijack it, which is obviously dangerous. So Daryl gave Laurent his dagger for protection and told Laurent to leave first. He'd be right behind him. Laurent, this time, followed the plan obediently. Taking up arms and escaping, Daryl observed the situation. The people in the vehicle had disembarked. Seizing the moment when one of the men was alone, Daryl picked up a hammer and moved to approach. The outcome was... They are Janet's subordinates and are aware of Daryl's identity. Their target is Laurent. Daryl starts playing dumb, but the soldiers aren't fooled. Just as they are about to act, Laurent walks over, diverting their attention. The obvious result is that both Daryl and Laurent are captured. Meanwhile, in a luxurious mansion in Paris, Isabelle awakens from her slumber. The room boasts a comfortable large bed, valuable paintings, and a meticulously arranged breakfast by the butler. Soon, Quinn enters, presenting the opulence of the mansion to Isabelle, claiming he has fulfilled his promises. His military contact informed him that Laurent and Daryl have successfully left the city. Quinn desires Isabelle to witness his transformation and hopes for her to fall in love with him again. However, Isabelle despises the narcissistic Quinn. While Quinn leaves the room, Isabelle searches for weapons, grinding the corners of a picture frame into makeshift weaponry. As she does so, she seeks forgiveness from God. Isabelle intends to kill Quinn and escape, but her attempt fails. Quinn believes in redemption, and Isabelle gave him this chance. However, the next day, Isabelle changes her mind. Hating her own weakness, she contemplates ending her life. Then the housekeeper comes in and says she's here to bring breakfast. Isabelle attempts to refuse, but the butler insists it was sent by her friend and reveals a note beside the tray. As Isabelle reads the contents, her expression changes dramatically. Subsequently, she starts to cater to Quinn, even wearing the necklace he offers. Isabelle's sudden optimistic demeanor bewilders Quinn. who attributes the change to his charismatic personality. They arrive at Janet's base together. Janet invites them to a banquet, and Quinn sees it as recognition of his abilities. Isabelle also meets Fallow and the others, who have been captured, and they don't talk to each other, but go straight to the base. Inside, Isabelle witnesses soldiers interrogating prisoners. Janet rushes out to explain that her subordinates, responsible for city defense, released an important person after taking a bribe of a bottle of wine. Quinn realizes his actions have been exposed. When they enter a room, Anna's appearance confirms all suspicions. Quinn has been betrayed. Soon, Isabelle is drawn to a familiar figure, Daryl. He, too, is imprisoned. Quinn is also confined. Janet gathers everyone, intending to shatter their dreams and strengthen her rule. She arranges a special spectacle. The spiritual backbone of the Union of Hope survivors is Laurent. Janet forces Laurent to stand by her side, eliminating the last straw for the weak. After an impassioned speech by Janet, the crowd is energized, and her support soars. Any resistance must be crushed, with Daryl as the representative. Daryl is brought into the arena, handed a weapon by a guard. Daryl is a bit puzzled. Janet is anticipating a spectacular performance. Then, two soldiers push a zombie into the arena. They inject a serum into the zombie. Daryl instantly understands he is about to face an enhanced zombie. The impending battle is on the brink, and the situation is critical. The latest 2023 zombie drama The Walking Dead, Daryl Dixon finally reached its season finale. After defeating the enhanced corrosive zombies, Daryl safely escorted Laurent to the Union of Hope's Stronghold. Daryl's journey through the French zombies comes to an end. However, the open-ended conclusion leaves the audience in suspense. Faced with Laurent surrounded by zombies and a fishing boat ready for departure, what choice will Daryl make? We can only await the airing of the second season. The appearance of the war goddess Carol at the end and the second season's theme, the Book of Carol, along with glimpses of Isabelle and Laurent in the trailer, suggests that the journey in France may not be over. Carol's appearance as the main character in Season 2 is the culmination of the spin-off's popularity. Without further ado, the storyline continues from the previous episode. Daryl, knife and axe in hand, prepares for a fierce battle with the enhanced zombies. As the bindings loosen, the zombie charges straight at Daryl. Undeterred, Daryl stabs the zombie with the pointed end, but the zombie merely twitches and rises again. Daryl then swings the axe at the zombie's legs, but it still manages to get up. Without hesitation, Daryl thrusts the knife into the zombie's chest, only to be surprised by a high concentration of strong sulfuric acid flowing from the wound, scalding Daryl. Janet on the stage was very happy to see this. Without his weapon, Daryl had no advantage, and zombies didn't want to give Daryl a chance to breathe. The zombies passed through the axe and attacked Daryl again. In the face of danger, Daryl remained calm. He looked at the nearby flag and swiftly ran towards it, seizing the opportunity as the zombies missed their attack. Daryl picked up the flag, executed a skillful backhand swing, sending the zombies flying. Following up, he directly thrust the flag into the vital area of the zombies. This combination of moves was nothing short of breathtakingly cool. This combo move leaves Janet fuming with anger. Janet's lungs were about to explode. She had wanted to make an example out of Daryl, but she didn't expect to let Daryl steal the show in front of the audience. Janet didn't stop there and ordered her men to bring Quinn in. The guards chained the hands of both individuals together and distribute weapons once again, believing that the rules dictate a one-on-one fight for survival. Daryl and Quinn exchange taunts, reaching a boiling point. Unexpectedly, the lights in the arena suddenly go out, and the low growls of zombies resound again. After a few seconds, a horrifying sight unfolds as multiple zombies appear in the arena. Realizing the severity of the situation, Daryl and Quinn swiftly adjust to ally status in the face of the imminent zombie threat. Next, they must collaborate and personally work together to kill the zombies. After zapping the potion, the zombies immediately went into a frenzy. However, an unexpected incident occurs shortly after. The doctor's experimental drug seems unstable, and the neck of one of the zombies suddenly swells. After 3 seconds, the zombie's head explodes. Janet becomes furious and glares angrily at the doctor. Although an accident has occurred, there are still 3 enhanced zombies in the field. The 2 of them stand prepared, ready to face the oncoming threat. Suddenly, another unexpected incident happens. A nearby zombie unexpectedly attacks their own kind. This zombie is attacking indiscriminately, and its fighting capability is strong. It tears open the head of another zombie with just one hand. The 4th zombie is also released and starts chasing Daryl and Quinn. The previous zombies also join the rampage. The battle between humans and zombies begins. Daryl chops off the leg of a yellow-shirt zombie with an axe, but the blue-shirt zombie lunges at him again. Quinn fiercely strikes the zombie's head in an attempt to help Daryl escape. The doctor has welded an iron helmet to the zombie's head, and no matter how hard Quinn tries, he can't smash it open. The yellow zombie with a broken leg ran over and attacked Quinn. The scene immediately descends into chaos. Fortunately, they have a seamless cooperation. Quinn first smashes the yellow-shirt zombie's head, but the blue-shirt zombie still charges at him. Quinn desperately struggles to break free. Daryl quickly uses a chain to restrain the zombie, and together they exert force, finally severing the zombie's head. The crowd at the scene erupts into enthusiastic applause, cheering for Daryl. Janet was furious. She was trying to win the crowd's confidence with this performance, but her plan was not working. Daryl picked up the heads of the zombies and threw them at the podium. This action was a slap in the face of Janet. Finally, Janet makes up his mind that he must kill Daryl on the spot, or else the situation will become even more uncontrollable. While her men were about to make a move, Falu, who was mixed up in the crowd, took care of him just in the nick of time. Gunshots ring out, and the scene becomes even more chaotic. Not knowing the exact number of their opponents, Janet's henchmen can only protect Janet and make their escape. Daryl and Quinn took advantage of the opportunity to slip away. However, an unexpected incident occurred along the way. Daryl discovered that zombies had injured Quinn's back. At this moment, Quinn didn't struggle much and quickly accepted the reality. He began reflecting on his actions, from the early days of the apocalypse when he considered abandoning the Isabelle sisters to the present where Laurent and Isabelle were captured. Quinn felt immense guilt. Daryl, being decisive, wanted Quinn to buy them some time. The only way to break the chains is to cut off Quinn's hand, and Quinn doesn't refuse, even interpreting it as martyrdom. So Daryl cut off Quinn's hand, allowing Daryl to escape. The guards nearby rushed in upon hearing the commotion. Quinn quickly went to confront them, successfully buying Daryl the time he needed. Quinn proved to be a devoted and respectable person in love. Daryl successfully escaped the underground, reuniting with Falu and others minutes later. However, Isabelle and Laurent were still inside. After removing the chains, Daryl had to return to rescue them. When he found them, a metal gate blocked the passage. Trying to open it together, they didn't expect Quinn to appear in the corridor. At this point, Quinn had turned into a zombie. In self-defense, Isabelle picks up a metal bar and pummels Quinn in the head, but Quinn remains aggressive. The enhanced zombies created by the doctor were indeed extraordinary. Isabelle was overpowered and pinned to the wall by Quinn. Daryl couldn't save her, so he handed the axe to Laurent. This situation was challenging for Laurent, who had been afraid to kill even a fish before, and now he had to face his zombified father. In the end, Laurent managed to do it. With a swift axe blow, he resolved the crisis. After escaping, they regrouped. They had to leave Paris as soon as possible. On the way, Isabelle wanted to thank Laurent for saving her life, but he seemed unaffected by the incident. As they continued their journey, the car suddenly broke down. Daryl had to stop and make repairs. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Isabelle and Daryl had a lengthy conversation. Daryl also shared Quinn's last words. It seems that Quinn's words and actions before his death had gained Daryl's approval, which is why Daryl spoke so highly of him. Isabelle also took the opportunity to say a lot of things from her heart, but then Isabelle stopped talking. It wasn't until Daryl emerged from beneath the car that he realized they were surrounded by Caudron and his men. They had no chance of escape. Even Daryl had to plead for mercy. Janet gave the order that they weren't to leave anyone alive. The soldier stabbed Isabelle and the soldiers urged Caudron to continue the execution. Just as the atmosphere reached a climax, something unexpected happened, and several of the henchmen instantly collapsed to the ground. Caudron, seemingly out of the blue, betrayed his own ranks. This left them all stunned. Why would Caudron, who held a grudge against them, spare their lives? It was not until later that they realized that it was not Janet's men who influenced Caudron, but the monk Losong. Caudron had deduced that Laurent was the Messiah Losong spoke of. At this moment, religious faith prevailed over vengeance for Caudron, leading him to pass up this opportunity for retribution. Caudron provided Daryl with the route to their headquarters and even advised them to burn the truck to evade Janet's pursuit. After completing these tasks, they proceeded on foot. The next day, after overcoming various challenges, they finally reached the Union of Hope's headquarters at Mont Saint-Michel. Upon entering the base, they received a warm welcome from the believers. Laurent's arrival served as a great inspiration to them. Lo Song, the leader of the Union of Hope, guided them through the facilities. After resting for a few days, Isabelle's back injury gradually improved. As soon as she stepped outside, she saw Daryl training young individuals in weapon use. At this point, Janet doesn't know the exact location of the base and they need to arm themselves as soon as possible. Laurent, playing football, was delighted to see Isabelle. He quickly approached and embraced her. Everything looks so beautiful here. During their time living together in the headquarters, Daryl proved to be a valuable helper. Isabelle grew increasingly fond of him, to the point where she even voluntarily asked Daryl to help her wipe her back. After a conversation, Isabelle tentatively inquired whether Daryl could stay. She had developed feelings for him. However, Daryl hesitated, recalling the unfortunate fate of his previous girlfriends. Afraid of getting too deeply involved, Daryl was determined to leave. Daryl was determined to go, and Laurent didn't force him to stay. Laurent told Daryl that he could walk to the northern coast, where there were dolphins fishing boats that could take them to England and then transfer to a ship to reach Newfoundland. Seizing this opportunity, Laurent formally requested Daryl to stay. Due to the Union of Hope's weak military strength, Laurent hoped for a strong leader to guide them. In the end, Daryl still declined. Laurent wasn't disappointed. He believed in destiny. On the other side, Caudron returned alone to confront Janet, fabricating a reason to try to cover up his actions. However, the shrewd Janet immediately saw through Caudron's lies. Witnessing the exposure, Caudron admitted to his betrayal. Janet was disappointed, but she didn't want to forgive Caudron. She wanted to know the exact location of the lair. Caudron shook his head straight away. Helpless, Janet had no choice but to lock Caudron away. Finally, the time came for departure. Daryl packed his belongings, preparing to leave. Isabelle approached him to bid farewell. Initially, Daryl intended to leave without a word, but Isabelle sought to convince him through Laurent. Her heartfelt words struck a chord with Daryl. After a long silence, he entered Laurent's room. Looking at him sleeping, Daryl eventually left a Rubik's Cube, a silent farewell. And so, Daryl departed from the Union of Hope. Upon a final glance at the scenery, he embarked on his journey home. Daryl, who arrived alone, left alone, his solitary figure appearing exceptionally lonely. As Daryl walked, he arrived at the coastline, where an American soldier's graveyard lay, mostly containing the remains of U.S. soldiers from the Normandy landings. Upon entering the graveyard, the usually composed Daryl suddenly became agitated. Finally, he stopped in front of a gravestone, his grandfather's resting place. Daryl had tears in his eyes. Despite his tough exterior, his inner emotions were unusually delicate. Family meant a lot to him, even across almost a century. At this time, the boat to pick him up also appeared. Daryl step by step 3 times back reluctantly left the place. He began shouting and waving his hands. The boat responded, but the commotion attracted the attention of zombies. The horde swiftly approached, but that didn't deter Daryl. He fought his way through, single-handedly carving a path of blood. Just as Daryl was about to board the ship, Laurent's voice reached him. Looking at Laurent behind him and the fishing boat waiting in front of him, what should Daryl do? It seems impossible to leave on his own. He can either turn around and go back, or he can take Laurent with him. This suspenseful moment would have to wait for the next season's broadcast. On the other side in Maine, Ryder was joyriding on Daryl's motorcycle. A fast car approached, and Ryder, sensing trouble, accelerated. After pulling away, Ryder quickly grabbed his shotgun and fired off a shot. The person in the car turned out to be Carol, who was looking for traces of Daryl. Carol asked Ryder how he got his motorbike, but Ryder wasn't honest and even had thoughts about Carol. Helpless, Carol had to resort to physical force. Ryder revealed the location of the gas station where Daryl had once stayed. With that, Carol sets off on her motorbike to find Daryl.